Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to completely flip the script on how you think about your own body. You know, we usually talk about the heart in these very romantic, or at least purely biological terms. But if you take a step back and look at it through the lens of physics, the heart is, well, it's basically just a highly efficient mechanical pump, chugging away inside a closed hydraulic loop. And I gotta tell you, the physical laws governing that loop are absolutely fascinating.
Okay, let's just dive right in because we have a really cool central mystery to solve today. If you've ever checked your pulse, you already know your heart doesn't produce this constant, even flow of blood, right? It pumps in violent, explosive bursts. It's like eject, stop, eject, stop. And yet, if you accidentally cut your finger, your blood doesn't spurt out in a stuttering, stop-and-go mess. It flows in a smooth, continuous, life-sustaining stream. So how on earth does our body filter those violent, explosive pulses into a perfectly steady flow?
Well, here is our roadmap for figuring that out. We're going to cover the human hydraulic circuit, the Windkessel effect, Poiseuille's law, Bernoulli's velocity, and finally, when the system fails. By the end of this explainer, the incredibly complex physics of your circulatory system is going to feel completely intuitive.
All right, part one, the human hydraulic circuit, blood in motion.
Before we get too carried away with the plumbing metaphors, let's quickly ground ourselves in the actual terminology. The field we're exploring here is called hemodynamics. Basically, that's the study of the physical quantities and properties that govern how fluid, specifically your blood, flows through the massive vascular tree of arteries, veins, and capillaries inside you. It is literally fluid mechanics just applied directly to your biology.
Now, at first glance, a map of this system might look exactly like a wiring diagram for an old radio, but it's actually a lumped parameter model of the human cardiovascular system. See, because your circulatory system is a closed loop, researchers can map it out using electrical circuit parameters. It's a perfect analogy. The blood flow acts like an electrical current. Your blood pressure acts like a voltage drop. The biological resistance inside your blood vessels, modeled as electrical resistors, and the stretchy, elastic nature of your arteries, what we call their compliance, is perfectly represented by capacitors.
Which brings us nicely to part two, the Windkessel effect, our biological fluid filter.
This elegant little workaround is known as the Windkessel effect. The term was actually coined way back in 1899 by a German physiologist named Otto Frank. Windkessel translates literally to air chamber. See, Frank noticed that old hand-pumped fire engines had this major flaw. The water shot out of the hose in pulses, just like blood ejecting from the heart, which obviously made it super hard to aim and fight fires. So engineers fixed it by adding an air chamber. The pump forced water into the chamber, which compressed the trapped air. Then, when the pump rested for a split second to draw more water in, that compressed air pushed the remaining water out, creating a nice, steady stream from the hose. Frank had this light bulb moment and realized our arterial system is doing the exact same thing.
For our arteries to pull off this trick and act as hydraulic filters, three mechanical conditions absolutely have to be met. First, the vessel must be compliant and has to be able to stretch out. Second, there has to be resistance downstream to slow the fluid down. And third, fluid has to be forced in way faster than it can naturally leave. So when your heart contracts, it violently shoots blood into the aorta. Because of that downstream resistance, the blood can't just escape instantly, so the elastic walls of your arteries actually balloon outwards, capturing and storing the energy of that heartbeat. Then the moment your heart relaxes, those elastic walls snap right back, squeezing the blood forward. Your arteries are literally storing physical energy to keep your blood moving while your heart is resting between beats.
But of course, not all of our biological pipes are built for this kind of heavy lifting. We really have to contrast our arteries with our veins. Arteries are thick, they're relatively stiff, and they are high-pressure vessels. They have to take the violent brunt of the heart's pumping and expand elastically. Veins, on the flip side, are the low-pressure side of the whole operation. They are highly compliant, super stretchy volume reservoirs that can easily collapse or just expand out as needed. When you map out the pressure and volume, it becomes so clear. The incredibly steep curve of an artery shows that pumping even a tiny amount of extra blood volume in there causes a massive spike in pressure, purely because the walls are so relatively stiff. But veins? Their curve is incredibly flat at the bottom. They can take on a massive amount of extra fluid, and the pressure barely budges at all. It makes them the absolute perfect storage tanks for holding extra blood until your body actually needs it.
Moving on to part three, Poiseuille's law and vascular resistance.
Now, the internal space of a blood vessel can change dramatically. Your blood vessels are definitely not rigid plastic PVC pipes. They are alive and incredibly dynamic.
They can widen out, which we call vasodilation, or they can narrow down, which is vasoconstriction. And there's a fundamental principle in fluid dynamics called Poiseuille's law that tells us resistance in a tube is inversely proportional to the radius raised to the fourth power. Okay, I know that sounds like a mouthful of physics jargon, but all it really means is this. If you shrink the width of a blood vessel even a tiny microscopic amount, the resistance to the flow violently shoots up.
When you apply this math to real-world scenarios, like how vasoactive drugs work, the data is staggering. Taking a vasodilator relaxes the vessels, which drops the resistance and increases the compliance. That directly lowers your overall blood pressure. But introduce a vasoconstrictor into the system, the resistance spikes instantly, completely altering the hydraulic pressure of your entire body.
And get this, here is the really mind-blowing reality of it all. Over 60% of all the flow resistance in your entire cardiovascular system happens in these tiny, microscopic arteries called arterioles. Just imagine them acting like billions of tiny, adjustable nozzles on a garden hose. By constricting or dilating just a fraction of a hair, these arterioles dictate your total blood pressure and dynamically direct blood flow exactly where your body needs it, second by second.
All right, let's look at part 4, Bernoulli and blood velocity, pressure and speed.
This is where things get completely counterintuitive. Enter the Bernoulli principle. Now, naturally, you'd probably think that squeezing a fluid through a much tighter space would increase the pressure inside that tight space, right? Makes sense? But Bernoulli discovered the exact opposite happens. As a fluid moves into a narrower passage, it's forced to speed up. And because energy has to be conserved, that sudden, huge increase in kinetic energy, the speed, actually causes a drop in the internal lateral pressure pushing against the walls of the tube.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to think about the continuity equation. It simply states that because the total flow has to remain constant in a closed hydraulic system, the velocity of the fluid absolutely must increase as the cross-sectional area decreases. Think of it like this. If a gallon of blood enters a wide pipe every minute, a full gallon of blood has to exit the narrow part of that pipe every minute. The only physical way to get the exact same amount of fluid through a much smaller hole in the exact same amount of time is to shoot it through much, much faster.
Which sadly brings us to part 5, when the system fails, the mechanics of heart disease.
When you compare a normal, totally healthy artery alongside one that is restricted by cholesterol plaque, you're looking at a severe, unnatural constriction in your body's hydraulic circuit. Just to drive the blood past this blockage and maintain the vital flow your body demands, a massive and incredibly dangerous demand is placed on the heart. It literally has to pump harder and harder against that resistance.
And here is the tragic irony of the Bernoulli effect playing out in real life. Because the plaque has severely narrowed the artery, the continuity equation dictates that the blood must speed up drastically just to get through the gap. But as Bernoulli taught us, this massive increase in speed causes the internal pressure pushing against the artery walls to plummet. The pressure can actually drop so low that the diseased artery can literally suck itself closed due to the pressure of the surrounding external tissue. It just snaps shut, completely cutting off the blood supply.
It really is an astonishing and incredibly delicate balance of physics keeping you alive right at this very moment. But you know, understanding your own internal plumbing shouldn't just be some dry academic exercise. It should empower you to maintain it. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If your vascular system is simply an intricate, beautiful hydraulic machine, what daily choices are you making to keep your pipes flowing smoothly? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this sparked your curiosity to learn even more about the incredible machinery inside you. Catch you next time.